Uh, so this morning we're going to look at a sutta from the Pali Canon. Before we do that, I just want to say a little bit about why I'm doing this series of talks. It's because when I read Buddhism, I mainly read traditional texts. It's very, very seldom that I read a contemporary book written by a Buddhist about Buddhism. I do occasionally, but I much prefer to go back to the texts, and especially the Pali Canon where the Buddha is speaking. So why do you need someone else? Why would you read a book about Buddhism by someone else when you can read a book by the Buddha about Buddhism? That's the way I think of it. But there's not only the Pali Canon, there's also there's a whole treasury of texts in the Mahayana school as well, or schools. Loads and loads of brilliant texts. And then there's the Vajrayana, of course. You've got Milarepa and Padmasambhava and people like that, and really wonderful imaginative texts. But I've noticed that not many people I know actually read traditional canonical Buddhist texts. And sometimes I ask them why not, or I might recommend a text to someone. I remember recommending the Vimalakirti to a friend of mine, and next time I saw him, he said, I couldn't get into that. That was really weird. Because it is a bit weird if you're not used to the style of things like that. So one of the things I like to do is introduce people to Buddhist texts in the hope that they'll get into them and begin to read them themselves, because they're millions of them, millions of texts which we can learn from. But there are barriers between us and texts very often. One of the barriers, of course, is they were written in Pali or Sanskrit or Chinese or Tibetan. And so then you've got the translator is translating that text to you, for you. But every translation is an interpretation of a text. And it depends on the translator, where we get on with the text. You might not like the text, but it may not be the text you not like, and you not like the translator's way of interpreting the text for you. So that's one barrier. And of course, another barrier is massive cultural differences. So here we are we're in the 20th century or the 21st century? 21st century, yeah. In the West. And, we read novels and factual books and so on, and they're written in styles which are accepted. People know how to read books, and it's unless you read a really weird experimental novel, which makes it really difficult to understand. Usually the kind of books we read are very easy to read. They're written in a way which makes it easy to read for us, and all the cultural references are familiar to us. Shakespeare's a bit different, isn't it? Because it's a bit hard to read Shakespeare because it's in very early English and it's quite hard to understand. And maybe that's a good parallel, actually. And there are jokes in Shakespeare and we don't laugh at them because we don't even know there are jokes sometimes. This joke happens and you're not in on it because you don't know what was happening around that time. It's exactly the same with the Pali Canon, actually, Pali Suttas. The Buddha was really humorous. The Pali scholar Richard Gombrich from Oxford has written about this, the Buddha's humor. He's actually really funny sometimes, but we're not expecting him to make a joke. So when he makes a joke, we don't realize it's a joke. I remember reading a novel. I've read the novels by this guy before, can't remember his name right now, and they're quite serious novels and really well written, and I love them. And then he wrote a comic novel, and I bought it, and I didn't know it was a comic novel. And after halfway through, I thought, this is rubbish. And then I found out it was a comic novel. And I was, oh, yeah, ha, that was funny, wasn't it? But if you think it's supposed to be serious, it's not funny. It's just weird. So the Buddha makes jokes and we don't get them because we're not expecting him to make a joke. And it was written in Pali, or he spoke in Magadhan. Then it was translated into Pali. Then it was translated into another language. And then it's lost. It's lost in translation, as we say. So the cultural differences are really big. And of course, the Pali Canon, for instance, was written down maybe a few hundred years after the Buddha lived. He didn't write, he just spoke and people remembered. And then that was all gathered together. And then the way oral traditions work is that you repeat things over and over again to remember them. So then people are put off when they read a something from the Pali canon because there's repetition, repetition, repetition. And you think, well, I just read this bit. And so that's another reason we're put off. So lots of reasons, really. And so you have to get through all those. One of the similes that I use, or metaphors, simile, I think it is, about getting into early Buddhist text is years ago, I'm a great fan of classical music. I listen a lot to classical music. And years ago, I had a 3-month break and I gave myself the challenge of listening to contemporary classical music. Now, this is about 20 years ago. And I was listening to Ligeti, Lutoslawski, Messiaen, Boulez, God, he's difficult, and people like that. And the kind of music, if you're not used to it, it just sounds like an awful cacophony. It's disjointed, or it seems to be disjointed. It's discordant, unrhythmic, and so on, arrhythmic. And you think, this isn't music. But I thought, well, these people have dedicated their lives to writing this stuff. They must think it's good. So I gave myself the challenge of listening and listening and listening until I got it. And I did. After a while, I found after it was pretty ugly and cacophonous, it became rather beautiful. And not all of it, but I don't like all of early classical music either. You know, it's partly a taste thing, isn't it? But you need to habituate yourself to a style. So we're going to start with quite an easy Pali Sutta and a very early one. It's from the Udana. I'm not going to give you all the details of where that is in the Pali Canon. I might do that at the end if you want to know. But Udana means, literally it means breathing out. And sometimes it's translated as an exclamation. One of the early translators translated it as a verse of uplift. So what happens is there's a little story or an incident, and then the Buddha gives a teaching, and then he follows it up with this Udana, which is always in verse. Apparently in the Pali language, it's quite easy to speak in verse, unlike English. It's a bit like Italian, I expect. It's much easier to speak in verse in Italian in a spontaneous way than it is in English. And it's like that in Pali. So it was an inspired utterance in a way. So at the end of the sutta, we'll hear this inspired utterance. So this text has a number of chapters. A chapter is about 8, 9, 10 suttas. And we're going to look at a sutta from chapter 5, and it's sutta number 3. So that's enough of an introduction. Where are we? There are many translations of this one. I'm going to take translation by Bhikkhu Ananda Jyoti. So it's the discourse about the Leper Suppabuddha. I spelt it wrong in my blurb for the advert. It's Suppabuddha. Well, Buddha, you know. So Suppabuddha, and he's a leper. So let me just read a little bit. Thus have I heard. Let's bring it over here. Yeah. At one time, the gracious one was living near Ratnaguna in Bamboo Wood at the squirrel's feeding place. I might say something about that. Actually, thus have I heard is, you get that with nearly every sutta. Thus have I heard, thus who has heard. It's usually understood to be Ananda, who was the Buddha's attendant for the last 20 years of the Buddha's life. And Ananda had this gift of being able to remember everything. Sometimes it's not a photographic memory, it's more like a phonographic memory. He could remember everything the Buddha taught, and he was with him for 20 years. So he was really necessary when the Buddha died, because they needed to gather all the teachings together. So they got Ananda in, and he repeated all these teachings. So thus have I heard, it's thus as Ananda heard. At one time, the gracious one, Bhagavat, was dwelling near Rajagaha in Bamboo Wood at the squirrel's feeding place. This is the favorite place of the Buddha. He often went there to stay. Then at that time, the leper, known as Suppabuddha, and Ananda Jyoti has very helpfully given us the translation of that, wide awake. Suppabuddha means wide awake. That must mean in a physical sense, because he wasn't a Buddha, he wasn't enlightened at that time. He was in Rajagaha, and it says of him, a poor man, a wretched man, a miserable man. This is unusual for the Pali Suttas to tell you the state of the person who the Buddha was going to speak to. And I think this is very interesting and important. If this were a modern novel, the novelist telling this story, the novelist would really make a lot of this. And this is one of the things you have to realize. You have to read into the text, you have to imagine into the text what it must be like to be this person, Suppabuddha the leper. So you probably know what leprosy is. I remember hearing about leprosy for the first time at school when I was quite a young boy, and in the religious knowledge lesson. And it must occur in the Bible a few times. People had leprosy. And of course, when you're a leper, well, I'll tell you what leprosy is. I looked it up this morning. A contagious disease that affects the skin, mucous membranes, and nerves, causing discoloration and lumps on the skin, and in severe cases, disfigurement and deformities. So that's leprosy. And actually, today, about 208,000 people in the world have leprosy, mainly in Africa and Asia. So that's the disease he had. And you can imagine living in ancient India, 2,500 years ago, if you had leprosy, it would show, and people would be frightened of you. They wouldn't want you around. So you'd be an outcast. And somehow you'd have to live. How do you get your food if people won't come near you, and so on? So if it were a novelist bringing Suppabuddha into the story, you'd probably have a backstory, wouldn't you? How Suppabuddha was a boy and he had lovely parents and a brother and a sister, and they lived in such and such a village, and everyone was really happy, and he was going to be a farmer when he grew up. But then he caught leprosy, maybe his whole family caught leprosy, and that life just completely broke up. Catastrophe. And he ended up wandering around India on his own, trying to somehow eat and keep himself alive. And no one wanted to come near him. That's the state he was in. So when the text says a poor man, a wretched man, a miserable man, that's probably an understatement. So we have to bear this in mind. This man, an outcast, no one will get near him, terribly ill and probably in quite a lot of pain, and all sorts of things going wrong with his body. And he's trying to find some food. So at that time, the gracious one was sitting. Actually, I'll just say something about this gracious one, Bhante. When Bhagavat, it's never, the Buddha is hardly ever called the Buddha in the Pali Canon. He is sometimes, but usually he's called the Bhagavat, which means gracious one, lucky one, auspicious one, Lord. Sometimes people translate it as. So he was sitting, teaching the Dhamma, surrounded by a great assembly. The leper Suppabuddha saw, while still far away from that crowd of people, assembled together. Having seen that, this occurred to him. Undoubtedly, in this place, some comestibles and edibles will be distributed. I'll come back to that. Well, now, I could go to that great crowd of people. Perhaps I will get some comestibles and edibles in this place. So this is what I mean about translations. Whoever says comestibles and edibles? I mean, would Suppabuddha really have thought, maybe I'll get some comestibles and edibles from this great crowd of people? No, food. He would have wanted some food. Why did translators do this? He's translating very literally, I suppose. I looked up comestibles. I didn't know what it meant in the dictionary, and it means food, and it's formal, but it's also humorous, and it's the kind of thing some comedian would use, isn't it? Oh, I'm looking for some comestibles. It's just not on, is it? Why do they do that? I looked up another translation. It said staple food and non-staple food. I didn't even know what staple food was. I had to look it up in the dictionary. It's just like, why don't they just say food? Anyway, he's hungry, he needs some food. And he thinks if he goes to that crowd of people, he might get some food. But then the leper Suppabuddha went to that great crowd of people. How big is that crowd? We don't know, it doesn't say. Could be 20, 30, could be like this. You could be a great crowd of people. It could be 100, I don't know. He went to that great crowd of people, but then he saw that the gracious one sat teaching the Dharma, surrounded by a great assembly. No, I've done that bit already, hasn't it? Oh, no, I haven't. Having seen this, this occurred to him. Here there are no comestibles or edibles. There's no food here being distributed. This ascetic Gosama is teaching Dhamma to the assembly. Perhaps I also could hear the Dhamma. So this is important, isn't it? Because he hasn't come to hear the Dhamma. He's come to get some food, and there's no food. So, okay, well, I'll listen to the Dhamma instead then, as a second best, perhaps. And if you're really hungry, if you're in his state, it would be a second best, wouldn't it? Because you would be starving. You really need some food. And okay, I'll listen to the Dhamma instead. Now it becomes really, well, it's already interesting, isn't it? But this is good, this next bit. The gracious one saw the leper. Then the gracious one applied his mind and encompassed fully the whole of that assembly with his mind, thinking, who here is able to understand the Dhamma? There's a couple of important points here, isn't there? Let's take the last one. Who here is able to understand the Dhamma? So this takes us back to soon after the Buddha's enlightenment. You know the story. Sometime after his enlightenment, he wondered, can I teach this? And he thought, no one will understand it. It would cause me vexation. There's another word, isn't there? Vexation. Whoever uses the word vexation. I'll get annoyed if people won't understand me when I'm trying to describe the Dharma to them. So no, I won't do it. I'll just sit here in nirvanic bliss. And then, of course, thankfully for us, we should worship this God. Brahma Sahampati comes in and says, no, you got to teach the Dharma. Some people will understand it. And then the Buddha had this vision of a pond or a lake full of lotuses, and some of them were deep in the mud and some of them were in the water and some of them outside the water, but they were closed and some were open. And he thought, some people might get it. Some people have but little dust in their eyes. So that's why he's teaching. But he knows that most people have loads and loads of dust in their eyes and not going to get it. So he's got this crowd of people here and he's looking around for someone who might have just little dust in their eyes, or as he puts it here, who here is able to understand the Dhamma? But how did he do that? It says he applied his mind and encompassed fully the whole of that assembly with his mind. Now, you can easily think he was applying magical power, but I don't think that's really necessary to think that. Because, you know, I'm a teacher. I've been teaching for donkey's years. And I often look around at the crowd of people, or not always a crowd, sometimes it's a handful of people. And sometimes I just catch someone's eye and it's like, I'm talking and they just got it. They've got it. And then it's as if I'm beginning to talk mainly to them, not only to them, but mainly to them. Sometimes I get it wrong. I remember I won't tell you this story, but it's possible to get it wrong, you know, to misunderstand someone's look. But the Buddha wouldn't have done that. He would have understood that there's someone in this crowd who really gets this. So I'm gonna really focus on that person. So the gracious one saw the leper Suppabuddha sat in the assembly, and having seen him, this occurred to him. This one here is able to understand the Dharma. He can see that Suppabuddha is able to understand the Dharma. That's really interesting, isn't it? That Suppabuddha is in such a difficult situation, such a hellish situation. And this reminds me of the Chinese Chinese Buddhist idea that, you know, in the Wheel of Life, and you've got the 6 realms. And what the Chinese did with the 6 realms is they decided they put Buddha seeds in each realm, and some realms had more Buddha seeds than others. In other words, it's more likely that people are going to gain enlightenment from that realm than others. And they put loads of seeds in the hell realm. And why is that? Because hellish is such a horrible place. It's so awful that you really want to get out of it. So you've got loads and loads of motivation. So maybe that's why he thought, Suppabuddha, he'll be able to understand this. He's suffering so much. I don't know. So he says that, and then, or he thinks that, and having regard to the leper Suppabuddha, he related a gradual talk. Kanyachita, this is where you come in. A gradual talk. Sometimes this is called a graduated discourse. It's Anupubba is the Pali. Anupubba means step by step, step by step by step. It's a step by step talk. And the Buddha did this a lot with people he'd never met before. I've never come across a text where he did it with someone he knew already. So always with someone he never met before. And presumably therefore that person had never come across the Dhamma before. So they were what we call a beginner, a step-by-step talk. And so here we are. You understood that trouble is with computers, they do stupid things, don't they? Here we are again. So related a gradual talk, that is to say, and the text makes it clear what this gradual talk is made up of. Talk on giving, talk on virtue or ethics, sila, talk on heaven, the Deva realms, the danger, degradation, and defilement of sensual desires, and the advantages in renunciation. These he explained. Now, all these things that the Buddha's talking about here would have been common in India amongst all the various teachers of different traditions. Everyone knew that if you were going to take up the spiritual life, you had to do these things. You had to be generous. If you can't be generous, you can't live the spiritual life. You know, you're hemmed in, you're closed off from people. You're not able to give. So that really, you really got to start with generosity. That going to the Mahayana, that's the first paramita, isn't it? Talk on virtue or ethics as well. Of course, you have to be ethical. That's the next part. Talk on heaven. Now, why heaven? Why does the Buddha talk on heaven? I think there are a couple of reasons here, because the results, the karmic results of giving and ethical behavior is you'll be reborn as a god. That's what happens. You know, you have to believe in rebirth for that to happen, but that's the result of virtue and giving. You get reborn as a deva somewhere. There's another reason I was going to. Oh yeah, that's right. Because not everyone the Buddha met was interested in gaining enlightenment. Some of them just wanted a better life. Some of them wanted to know how to get to heaven in their next life. And some of them, a few of them, wanted to gain enlightenment. So the Buddha taught everybody. And he taught according to what they wanted. So, you know, he doesn't know Suppabuddha. He doesn't know anyone in the crowd probably. So he's thinking, well, you know, they might not want to gain enlightenment, but they might want to get a rebirth, better rebirth. So this is the way to get that better rebirth. And then he says the defilement of sensual desires and the advantages in renunciation. So renunciation, really big thing in the Buddha's teachings. Probably none of us take it seriously enough. We really do need to. We need to renounce loads and loads of things. You can't go for refuge unless you go forth. You can't take everything with you. So we need to take this seriously, but I'm not going to hammer on about that now. Just by the by. These he explained. So he's talking and people are listening to him, and Suppabuddha is listening to him. When the gracious one knew that the leper Suppabuddha was of ready mind, malleable mind, unhindered mind, uplifted mind, trusting mind, then he explained the Dharma teaching the awakened ones have discovered for themselves suffering, origination, cessation, path, the Four Noble Truths. That's particular to the Buddha, that teaching. The earlier teachings were not particular to him. Everyone knew about those. It was important to do those. And whether you wanted a better life now or a better rebirth, those are the things to do. And if you wanted to gain enlightenment, those are the things to do as well. But if you want to gain enlightenment, now we're getting serious. So this is what the Buddha, that's what the gradual, the Anupubba step-by-step talk means. So I'm going to go into this in some detail. This is where Kalyatita comes in. I'll tell you a story in a moment about that. But so when the Gracious One knew that Leper Suppabuddha was of ready mind, Pali for ready mind, kala chitta. Kala, ready, prepared. Kalla, chitta, mind, heart, your interior life, really, your interiority. So you're ready. What are you ready for? You're ready for insight. You're ready for wisdom teaching. And the Sanskrit, I believe, for kalla chitta is kalya chitta. And here's a lovely story. I had just discovered this teaching and looked into it and found all the Pali and everything, got really excited about it and wrote about it in my book, Great Faith, Great Wisdom. And I was on my way to Adhisthana and I missed my connection, which you can do very often when you go to Hereford from Manchester. They give you 6 minutes to get your connection and you often lose it. And then you have to wait an hour in the not very nice cafe there. So that's what I was doing. And I was reading something and there was a tap on the shoulder and it was Kalya Chitta on her way home to Ratnaguna. And I was able to tell her about this, the Kala Chitta. It was a great meeting. It was auspicious. Don't know if you can see it, Kala Chitta, behind me. I've got your heart card behind me that you sent me recently. So Kala Chitta, it means he can see that Leper Suppabuddha, his mind is now ready for the works, for the teaching, for wisdom. He's ready now. Now, what does readiness consist in? 4 things. Where are we? God, it's gone again. Why do blooming computers do this? Here we are. So the first part of the ready mind is the malleable mind. Mudu chitta. Mudu, one of my favorite words. I often talk about mudu. Mudu, M-U-D-U, means soft, gentle, tender. It also means weak, but in this regard, it doesn't mean weak. It means soft, gentle, tender. So what does it mean to have a soft, gentle, tender mind, heart? It means you're receptive. It means you're softened. You're not hardened against what the Buddha's saying. You're not thinking, convince me. No, he's not in that state now. He's really listening. He's really wanting to know. He's allowing the Dharma in. It's not bouncing off him. So malleable, soft, mudu. Wonderful state of mind to be in. Probably the best translation is tender receptivity, perhaps. The next part is the next aspect of the ready mind is the unhindered mind. Unhindered mind. Nini Varana or Virina Varana. So Varana, you all know Varana, I'm sure. I'm sure you don't, but you should do. So Varana is usually translated as hindrance. So you got the Pancha Nivarana. It's Nivarana, isn't it? Not Varana, Nivarana. The Pancha Nivarana is the 5 hindrances. So you know what the 5 hindrances are. And sometimes translators understand, so Nivarana is hindrances and Vinivarana is no hindrance. Yeah. So some translators understand this to mean the 5 hindrances are no longer present in the listener's mind. They've gone. So that's an interesting way of understanding. It doesn't actually say that, but it could be interpreted as that. And what would that mean is if the 5 hindrances aren't present, the listener is in a very positive state of mind because the 5 hindrances represent negative emotions, negative states of mind. So it means he's in a positive state of mind, probably in access concentration, if not in the first jhana. That's what that would mean if it was the 5 hindrances aren't present. It may not mean that the 5 hindrances aren't present because other people translate it as the unobstructed mind, which is a very interesting way of understanding this. So think of the hindrances actually obstructions. So the unobstructed mind, the unhindered mind means it's not hindered by anything. You're really listening to the Dharma and you're not hindered by distrust of, let's say I'm talking to you as I am now. I'm your teacher right now. And if you've got an unhindered mind, you're not thinking, who is this guy? And who's he to say this? And oh, I heard this about him and I'm a bit worried about him. You're hindered. You're not really listening. You're not really able to take what I'm saying. But if you've met me and you know me and I'm a great guy and very trustworthy, then you've got an unhindered mind. What I'm saying, you're like, oh yeah, I get it. It's a little bit like the first one, isn't it? Malleable, soft, tender, gentle. Sometimes people say pliable, but this second one, unhindered, unobstructed. Again, there's no obstruction to the Dharma. It's not being bounced off. Yeah, the way people obstruct the Dharma is by coming up with questions which aren't real questions. Yeah, but what about this? That kind of thing that happens in, but if you do that all the time, then this happens. And these questions which aren't real questions, they're just obstructions in the way. So that's not there with Suppabuddha. Next one, uplifted mind. This is Udana. Now, some of you know an order member called Udana, and if you know him, you'll know he's very tall. And Udana means high. It means high, and therefore it means exalted, inspired, uplifted, and all those other words I can't think of right now. But it means right now, Suppabuddha is not only ready for the Dharma, he's not only really listening, he's not only really receptive, he's not only not putting up any hindrances and obstructions in the way, he's inspired now. He's delighted. Because the Buddha's been talking for a while and the Buddha must have been a great speaker. So he's like really enjoying himself. He's having a great time. And this comes out of the earlier one. If you've got let's say the unhindered mind, what that really means is that the 5 hindrances aren't present. Well, that means that you're either in access concentration or you're in the first jhana. So you'll be inspired. So that's what it means. You're really uplifted. And yeah, I see why it does that now. When I press a certain button, it takes me down. Here we are. Yeah. Uplifted mind. Final characteristic of the ready mind is just keeping you waiting. The trusting mind. The trusting mind. This is pasana. Pasana, which means loads of things. It's one of those Pali words which means so many wonderful things. It does mean trust. It means faith. It means devotion. So if we just take that for a while, because all those words are very connected, aren't they? If we take that meaning, by now, Suppabuddha is so enjoying himself. He's getting so much out of this talk that he's beginning to really trust the Buddha. She's like, yeah, I can trust this guy. He knows what he's talking about. And he's talking so well and so fluently about this that I can really trust him. So that his heart has opened up to the Buddha in that kind of way. But pasana means other things as well. Interestingly, it means clarity, lucidity. That's very interesting, isn't it? That pasana means both those things. It means trust, devotion, faith, but it also means clarity, lucidity. There's a connection there between faith and lucidity of mind. What else does it mean? It's got a connection with color, actually. That's another word, pasada, which is very, very similar to the word pasana. It means color. We'll see the significance of that in a moment. And it means happy. It means happy, but it doesn't mean happy in the sense of the early one, the uplifted mind. The uplifted mind is like a rush of, inspiration, exaltation. But this is quieter. It's the happiness that comes from having lived an ethical life. Yeah, it's that kind of quiet, contented happiness. Yeah. So those are the 4 aspects of the ready mind, the kala chitta. Let's just go through them again. Malleable, soft, gentle, tender, receptive, open, unhindered. The 5 hindrances perhaps aren't present, but at least it's not obstructed. Not obstructing the Dharma. Uplifted, inspired, trusting, faithful, devoted, happy, clear. So that's what the ready mind really means. And the Buddha always tried to get people into the state of mind before he taught them the real Dharma. Why? Because if he taught them the real Dharma before getting into this state, they'd understand it perhaps, but they wouldn't gain insight. And he wanted people to gain insight. So that's what he was doing. Now, this is really interesting to me because I've been a teacher, Dharma teacher, for a long, long time. And for the past 10 years, at least, I've been teaching people, mitras and order members, how to teach better. And one of the things I say is your main task actually is to get people into the Kalachitta. That's what you have to do. And then they go, blimey, how do I do that? Well, it's easy. It's easy. Just the first thing you need to do is connect with your audience, with the eyes, look at people, connect. That's why I like to see everyone on the screen, and make that eye contact. Then you've got the rapport. And I don't know, you just communicate in a friendly, the Buddha was what's he called sometimes? Can't remember the Pali word for it. He was also known as the friendly one. He was really friendly with people. And so just be really friendly, be open about yourself. Don't pretend you're someone who you're not. Don't pretend you're further on the path than you're not. Be open about your faults and so on. And people begin to trust you. That's what happens. And it's not a hard thing to do to get people into this state of mind. The great thing about it, if you're a teacher, is if I get into this state of mind nearly every time I teach. I'm in that state of mind now. Yeah. So let's go through that. I've got a malleable mind, unhindered mind, uplifted mind, trusting mind. It's all there. That's why I love to teach the Dharma. And the great thing about it is if you get into this Kala Chitta every time you teach the Dharma, well, what's your topic? It's the Dhamma. And who's your audience? It's the Sangha. So you've got the Dhamma and the Sangha there with you. And so you're likely to gain insight in this state of mind. This is the premium state of mind to gain insight through. So if as a teacher you do this a lot, then you understand the Dharma more and more as time goes on. So that's what's happened to this wretched, miserable man, this very, very unfortunate man, Suppabuddha. So what happens next? Here we are. Seeing that he was in this state of mind, the Buddha then explained the Dharma teaching the awakened ones have discovered for themselves. So this is particularly the Dharma now. Whatever has the nature of arising, screen's gone. Suffering, origination, cessation, path, the Four Noble Truths. He taught him the Four Noble Truths, taught them all the Four Noble Truths, but Suppabuddha was ready for them. So here we go. Then the leper Suppabuddha, having seen the Dharma, not understood it, seen it. Vipassana. Attained the Dharma, attained it. Understood the Dharma, penetrated the Dharma, crossed over uncertainty, being without doubts, attained full confidence or faith, saddha, having become independent of others in the teacher's teaching, after rising from his seat, went to the Gracious One, and after going and worshipping the Gracious One, he sat down at one side. The Buddha wasn't frightened of him. So what that means is Suppabuddha gained insight, deep insight, strong enough to become a stream entrant at least, because he became independent of the Buddha's teaching. He gained full confidence, full faith. That's one of the characteristics of a stream entrant. They have unshakable faith. Being without doubts, same. Stream entrants don't have doubts and so on. So he was a stream entrant at least. Then he said, excellent, Reverend Sir, excellent, Reverend Sir. Just as, revered Sir, one might set upright what has been overturned, or open up what has been closed, or show a path to one who is lost, or bear an oil lamp in the darkness for those with vision who can see forms. Just so has the Dharma been explained by the Gracious One in countless ways. Now, this is a stock passage in the Pali Canon. You get it over and over again after the graduated talk. Someone gains insight and they say this. So you read it again and again. And if you read these Pali texts a lot, you kind of skip over it, yeah, lamp in the path, you get to the next bit. But don't do that, because it's really important. Now, in order for us to really get a feeling for this, I want to show you a short film. I think it's 3 minutes long. Over to you, Mr. Tech Vajrapriya. Looks like he's having technical problems, like me. Here we go.
New glasses, new colorblind glasses, and he finna see that red ruby right there. Go ahead, brother. Go ahead. He finna cry. He finna cry. He finna cry in the club.
Bro, this is, bro, there's no way y'all see that.
Go and take a look at Big Red over there.
This is what y'all. Bro, what? Bro, what? Bro! There's no way this is like everyday life for y'all. Crazy. This is so crazy.
That's so wonderful, isn't it? It's so moving. I think that is what it must have been like for people when they met the Buddha and he opened their eyes, the Dharma eye. That's what it must have been like. It's just like, what? What did he say? There's no way you can see all this. It's like, that's what it must have been like for people when they met the Buddha and he taught them and they were ready and they gained some kind of insight. That's what we must remember when we come across these stock phrases of light and things, all that stuff that I read to you. Just absolutely wonderful stuff. If you go onto YouTube and you type in colorblind man and glasses, something like that, you'll get it. But there are a number of other films of people with similar experiences. There's a lovely one of a guy at college and all his college friends give him this as a birthday present. And he's in tears before he even puts them on. And so the people who give him, they're all in tears. It's a wonderful film. And he's in tears and he puts them on. He can't see anything because his tears stop him from seeing. But it's a really uplifting film. Really wonderful. Okay. So that's what happened to Suppabuddha. That's the kind of thing that happened to him. So what happens next? This is important. What happens next? No, let me just go back to I'm going to go back to the ready mind. What is the ready mind, the Kala-chitta? What does that really mean? You could see it as it's another way of describing the first jhana, because the first jhana is the optimal place to gain insight. But I kind of see it as the awakening of the imagination. Bhante once said, I always say Bhante rather than Sangharakshita, Bhante means teacher. He once said that the awakened imagination is the faculty that sees reality. So I think what has happened to Suppabuddha is his imagination has been awakened by the Buddha's teachings. But it's quite interesting that the way the Buddha, blimmin' computers, the way it's described how Suppabuddha sees the Dharma, having seen the Dharma, attained the Dharma. Now, it doesn't say in this particular one, it must be the translation, but other translations have his Dharma eye opened. Yeah, his Dharma eye opened. And again, it doesn't say in this one, I don't think. But then what it says is, just as dye, colored dye, and you've got a very clean, purified, clean white cloth, and just as dye gets on the white cloth, and because the cloth is white, it takes the dye, just so did, in this case, Suppabuddha get the Dharma. I love that because it's a very imaginative way of us understanding insight. I think there's a real problem with the word insight, actually. It's too secular. It doesn't give the full range of meaning of the word insight. And, you know, you get secular Buddhists and so on these days, and I'm sure they love the word insight. I think it doesn't do the experience justice. Illumination is the word that I much prefer to use, because your whole worldview is changed with insight. It's not just that you know something. Oh yeah, all things are impermanent. It's not that. It is that, but it's much more than that. It's like that man in the film. It's just like whoosh, the world is different. And I think not only is the imagination the faculty through which you see reality, but I think Vipassana, the seeing of reality, is actually an imaginative way of looking at the world. It's more imaginative than the one that we've got. So you could say that Putujanas, people who are not enlightened, the many folk, people like you and I, assuming you haven't gained insight, maybe you have, I don't know, but let's just assume we haven't at the moment. We see the world in a colorblind way. But when we gain insight, colors come in. It's much more colorful. It's much more imaginative. We see through the eye of the imagination. Yes, that's what I wanted to say. So what happens next? Excellent, Reverend Sir. And then he says, I go, Reverend Sir, to the Gracious One for refuge, and to the Dharma, and to the community of monks. Please bear it in mind, Reverend Gautama, that I am a lay follower who have gone for refuge from today forward for as long as I have the breath of life. This is a very interesting sequence. Let's go back to the beginning. Suppabuddha the leper, he wants some food. He sees a crowd. He thinks they might have some food. No, they don't. So, all right, I'll listen to the Dharma then. He gets into the ready mind, the kala chitta. The Buddha aims it right at him. He gives him the full teaching. He gains some kind of insight, deep insight. Everything changes for him. He sees color. He goes to the Buddha. He thanks him deeply with all his heart. And then he goes for refuge, to the three jewels for the rest of his life. Interesting that, isn't it? Because usually it's the other way around. We go for refuge. Usually, in a Shrewsbury Buddhist Center, for instance, somebody comes along, they come to a beginner's class, one of your order members teaches them, they like it, perhaps they go for refuge to the three jewels. Maybe later they gain insight, but it's the other way around here. It's like a really quick path, isn't it? Happens really quickly. Insight followed by going for refuge. And of course, in that case, the going for refuge that most of us partake in is what Sangha actually calls the provisional going for refuge. But this is the real going for refuge. In other words, it's informed by deep wisdom. It's a wise going for refuge. He's gained insight, but he knows there's further to go. So his practice is informed by this experience that he's had. So it's the real going for refuge. Please bear it in mind, Reverend Gautama, that I am a lay follower who has gone forth from today forward for as long as I have the breath of life. For the rest of my life, that's it for me. That's what I'm going to do with my life. some people, when this happens to them, they leave home and they become one of the Buddha's bhikkhu or bhikkhuni disciples, but not everyone. Some people stay as lay followers. And this is very interesting. There's one of my great heroes in the Western tradition is Wilfrid Cantwell Smith, who was a lay Christian minister, Canadian, and he was also one of the first comparative religion scholars. He taught at McGill University. And he wrote what I consider to be a really important book. It's called Faith and Belief, the Difference Between Them. It's very, very important difference. So belief is assenting to a certain number of ideas. In Buddhism, it's just like, do you believe in the Four Noble Truths? Yes, I believe in the Four Noble Truths. Yeah, that's belief. Faith is a bit different. Faith is much more existential and emotional, you could say. Not so much to do with words and ideas. Actually, faith is the first of the 11 positive mental events, isn't it? In every positive mental event, faith is present. So that shows that it's not just to do with believing certain ideas. So in that book, Faith and Belief, the Difference Between Them, he says he's not going to define faith, but actually he does on a few occasions. And my favorite of definitions is that faith has two factors. First factor is insight, and the second factor is positive response. So when I used to teach a lot at the Manchester Buddhist Centre, I teach loads and loads of beginners classes. As I was teaching, I could see pennies dropping, as it were, all over the class. Jaws dropping and eyes opening, and people going, oh, yeah, you could see it all over the place. Little insights, maybe not transcendental insights, which would make them stream entrance, but they were insights. They were like, yeah, I get it. And, but then that's the first part of faith is insight. And then it's followed by positive response. If you don't have a positive response, then that's the end of that. And funnily enough, some of those people who went, oh, yeah, fantastic, they didn't come the next week. Never saw them again. Then what happened to them? Maybe they were gained in such deep insight they didn't need me anymore. I don't know. But so sometimes you can have an insight, but you don't have a positive response to it. You don't follow it up. And this is what happened to Suppabuddha, the leper. He had this insight and then he wanted to follow it up. He wanted to devote the rest of his life to it. There was that famous phrase a few years ago, wasn't there? People at the Manchester Buddhist Centre used to have these T-shirts sometimes, find the truth and then live by it. And that's what that really means. Insight followed by what Wilfrid Cantwell Smith called yes. Insight followed by yes. That's what I want to do. That's what I want. Yeah. Then the gracious one instructed, roused, enthused, and cheered the leper Suppabuddha with a Dharma talk. Another one. Doesn't say what it is. And after greatly rejoicing and gladly receiving the word of the gracious one, after arising from his seat, worshipping him, circumambulating the gracious one, he went away. And then something happens to him, to Suppabuddha, which seems to be a theme in the Udana. And this happens to a number of people just after they've been taught by the Buddha and they've gained great insight. Unfortunately, what happens is, not long after the leper Suppabuddha had gone, a cow with a young calf, having attacked him, deprived him of his life. Shouldn't laugh. But just after gaining this deep insight, he was killed by a cow. Then many monks went to the gracious one, and after going and worshipping the gracious one, they sat down at one side. While sat at one side, those monks said to this gracious one, they told him, this is a repeat here, they told him exactly what happened. But then he said, what is his destination? What is his future state? Because the Buddha could do that. When somebody died, he knew where they were reborn. The Buddha says, a wise man, monks, was Suppabuddha, who practiced the Dharma in accordance with the Dharma and did not trouble me on account of the Dharma. The leper Suppabuddha, monks, through destruction of the three fetters, there we are, is a stream enterer, not subject to the fall, not subject to falling back, in other words, and is assured of arriving at full awakening. So it doesn't matter that he died. It doesn't really matter that much, because he's reborn and he's going to carry on and he's going to eventually gain enlightenment. He had to die sometime after all. When that was said, a certain monk said to the gracious one, "What was the reason, reverend sir, what was the cause through which the leper became a poor man, a wretched man, a miserable man?" Oh, we're going to find out that too. Formerly, monks, the Leper Suppabuddha was a son of a wealthy merchant. In this very Rajagaha, while going to his pleasure park, he saw the Pacheka Buddha, Tagarasiki, entering the city for alms, and having seen this occurred to him. Who is this leper roaming around with his leper's robe? He thought he was a leper. And having spat and circumambulated him disrespectfully on the left side, he went away. So in a previous life, he came across this Buddha and he thought he was a leper, and he spat at him and he circumambulated him disrespectfully with his left side rather than his right side, showing him. As a result of that deed of his, for many years, for many hundreds of years, goes on and on, for many hundreds, thousands of years, he boiled in the nether regions, in hell, in other words, he was in hell. And as a result of the remaining part of that deed of his, he became a leper in this very Rajagraha, a poor man, a wretched man, a miserable man. But he came to the Dharma and discipline taught by the Blessed One and obtained faith, obtained virtue, learning, liberality, giving, and wisdom. After coming to the Dharma and discipline taught by the realized one and obtaining faith, etc., etc., at the break of the body after death, he arose in a fortunate destiny. Oh, in the world of heaven, in the companionship of the Tavatimsa Devas. So he's been reborn in this great heaven world. And there he surely outshines the other devas with his beauty and repute. Now, I'm going to say something about this, actually. I hadn't actually thought I'd talk about this, but this is really interesting because there's physical beauty and there's spiritual beauty, as you know. And someone can be really beautiful physically, but they're a really horrible person. Their soul is, as it were, their soul is really ugly, horrible. But you can get someone who's not good looking in a conventional sense, someone who's quite not very nice to look at and so on, but you love them because they're such a lovely person. They're beautiful inside. There's a very interesting TED talk by a man whose name I can't remember, but if you want to look at it, it's called something, the talk is called Own Your Own Face. You'll find it easily on YouTube. And he was born really deformed with his eyes at the side of his face looking that way. And it was all, awful. And his mother didn't want him. She just couldn't stand having this deformed baby. But she got over that eventually. And he had loads and loads of operations as a child. And he had a nose built out of his toe. And, he still looks very odd. And so he gave this talk saying, you've got to own your face. Most people don't like the look of themselves and they turn away in the mirror, but own it. It's a really great talk. And I won't say more about that, but he was a lovely man. You'd want to hang out with this man. You might want to marry him, even though he looks like he does, because you could tell as he was talking, he was a lovely, lovely guy. So Suppabuddha, although maybe his body was falling to pieces and so on, he was a beautiful soul. And therefore, he was born in a place where beautiful souls live. And then comes the Udana. Then the gracious one, having stood the significance of it on that occasion, uttered this exalted utterance, Ananda Jyoti's translation of Udana. Here it is. As a man with vision, while he is endeavoring, would avoid dangerous paths, so a wise man in the world of the living should avoid bad paths. That's Udana. Unfortunately, sometimes Udanas don't really fit with the story. The Udanas were written in a more ancient Pali than the stories. So it could be that they were fitted together by other people, and that they've got this Udana there, and they think, well, let's put it there. So it doesn't really have much to say about the text, except for the fact that the Buddha did say of Suppabuddha, he came to the Dharma and discipline taught by the realized one, and obtained faith, obtained virtue, etc., and lived like that. So perhaps that was what the Buddha is saying, but I'll just read it again to you. As with a man of vision, vipassana, seeing, while he is endeavoring, striving, making an effort, would avoid dangerous paths which would lead you into dangerous areas, take you away from the Dharma perhaps. So a wise man in the world of the living should avoid bad deeds. I suppose it connects with the story of Suppabuddha's previous life and what he did with that other Buddha. I suppose that's what the connection is. So there we are. That's the text. In the chat box, if you want to copy that or press on that, you can go to the sutra itself, Anandajoti's translation. Okay. Goodbye, everybody.